our Safe Spaces policy for Young Greens will be posted into the chat in a second. But on safeguarding, Jane is also our lead safeguarding officer. And so if there's any safeguarding problems, you should be able to message her directly with any concerns that you might have. We've turned off the public chat, so that won't be available, but yeah, you're able to message either of the co-hosts this evening. And yeah, so that should be a thing with that. Apart from that, I'd like to say thank you to our candidates for attending this evening. So just to quickly run around these candidates, we have Amelia Womack and Tamsin Ahmad. We have Shara Ali. We have Adrian Ramsey on behalf of Adrian and Carla. We have Ashley Gunstock, and we have Martin Hemingway and Tina Rothery. So the ones you can see, you're welcome to turn on your cameras if you'd like during this call, so they can see you as well, and they can get some feedback from that from the audience, but you don't have to, and just bear in mind this is being recorded. Just some super quick stuff before we sort of get into things. So all candidates will have were invited and have the opportunity to answer speeches and questions. I've used a random number generator and done some fun magic to get random orders for question responses, but every candidate has an opportunity to either go first and go last on different questions. So that's all been sorted. And I think that is everything I need to cover. So I'll hand over to Jane.
Thank you, Kelsey. So we're going to start, as is tradition with Hustings, we're going to start with some opening speeches. So candidates, as you know, you have 4 minutes for these opening speeches. I'm going to obviously give you a reminder at about a minute. I'll just stick my hand up so that you are aware of that. So we're going to start with Ashley, and then we'll go over to Shara. Ashley, I cannot see you on my screen, but over to you, Ashley, for 4 minutes of your introductory speech.
Okay, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Ashley Gunstock, and I'm from Malvern Forest and Redbridge Green Party, and formerly of Barnet Green Party. I'm truly proud to say that I joined the Green Party 32 years ago, and have been campaigning for it out of principle and service ever since, because I passionately believed and still do in its agenda. We have moved forward and kept ahead of the game in the ever-changing times with our view of the world and how best to address the problems we face. We have long been punching way, way, way above our weight, but now we are losing direction, and with it, precious time, and also the urgency to address the real emergency. We've come to a fork in the road, and we are either we either continue in the way which we have done so far, which has not got us anywhere near where we should be, or we take a different path to reach our goal. Therefore, we either continue to do the wrong things in the hope that it will all eventually work out, or we do things differently. So I propose the following. First and foremost, we have to get rid of the present day deeply divisive, damaging and dangerous Tory government. We have to negotiate positive, progressive alliances with other parties whose members feel the same, have environmental aspirations, and also a desire for proportional representation. Now, just campaigning for us to try and get into power is no longer enough. Secondly, the time has come to revisit our policies on party funding. Our refusal to accept corporate donations is clear and principled, but puts us at a huge electoral disadvantage. When you consider that the Liberal Democrats received over 30 times more in donations than the Green Party in 2019, and the Brexit Party over 15 times more than we did, is it any wonder that we find ourselves hopelessly outgunned at election time, or that our hopes for significant gains so often fail to materialise? I therefore believe that we should unashamedly seek investment from ecologically and socially ethical companies. Finally, we need to devise a strategy within the party to better target our resources, keep it simple for the electorate to better identify with us, attract more members when we are seen to have more elected representation and thereby media attention. We need to achieve a level playing field for all and address the big issue of the imminent climate catastrophe together. That, I believe, is the way for us all to address the climate emergency from the ground up with accountability, honesty, and compassion. Thank you.
Thank you for that speech, Ashley. That was under 4 minutes, so well done for your timing. We're going to go over to Shara now for 4 minutes, so over to you.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you, Kelsey, for organising this hustings, which is dedicated, I feel, to your issues, Young Greens. Somebody got there. Ashley, do you mind switching your microphone off? Thank you. Can we start the clock again? All right. I'm really looking forward to hearing your questions and answering as best I can. And let me just start by saying where I see the priorities for the youth of today. Even when we listen to the announcements from our bumbling Prime Minister, we see how the youth of today really are at the sharp end of an unfair, unjust tax system. And that kind of intergenerational inequity has never been more pronounced. But we also see the youth of today, if I can put them like that, although they're a very diverse bunch, you are a very diverse bunch, converging on Westminster to tell our political leaders, who are generally of the elder generation, that we must fix and mend our ways, which are putting us into a climate catastrophe, which again is going to be affecting the youth and the younger generation foremost, most sharply. And this, I think, is at the heart of green politics, that everybody is equal, that everybody, irrespective of their age, has a future that deserves our utmost consideration and respect. And when we think about, foremost on all your candidates' minds is the climate and ecological emergency, that again is going to hit the youth more sharply than anybody. So let me just say a little bit about how I think my experience, my life experience, can bring something to the table when I'm speaking across the country. I do regularly speak at universities, often get invited to university events, both pre and post lockdown, to talk about our program of change across society, from votes for 16 to looking at every aspect of basic needs which are directly impacting and harming you more than everybody else, whether it's the cost of education, whether it's the complete lack of secure, sustainable housing, whether it's insecure jobs, 0 hours contracts without any security, and exploitation through apprenticeships. And I also have the added benefit and insight, I hope, at working in the education sector. And I don't just mean higher education, although for sure I've worked for many years in higher education, both as a teacher and a scholar, and also as a manager of services and mental health services, but also as somebody who works in lifelong education. And I think also in the Young Greens, as I say, a disparate bunch, many of you will be students, often going into higher education or further education, not necessarily that young, but maybe coming to education at a later time in your life or your career. And I think it's very important that we broaden our reach. And sorry, Jane, am I running out of time? Am I out of time?
You've got 1 minute left, 45 seconds.
So finally, just the big brush strokes now. The climate and ecological emergency are going to hit most impactfully the younger generation. They are the generation who see in the Green Party real hope of a sustainable future. And it's no accident then that we need to, I'm actually getting something on my screen now. No, nothing to do with you. number one priority is to make sure that we can speak to that younger generation and ensure that we can give them a decent, sustainable future across all aspects of their lives, whether it's housing, whether it's health, or the irresponsible tax policy, which we can see right now is affecting you and your futures more than anybody. Thank you.
That's 4 minutes over by about a couple of seconds. Thank you for that introductory speech, Shara. So I realize I didn't warn Martin and Tina that they're going next. Apologies, you are both going next. And then Emilia and Tamsin, you'll be afterwards. Adrian, you'll be last for this one. So I'm going to hand over to Tina, who I think is speaking on behalf of both of you for 4 minutes. Over to you.
Well, I'll share it with Martin, but good evening. I was trying to think, all day, what do I want to say to young Greens? How do I connect with you and what do we share? And I realized that your lives are so vastly different from what mine was like in youth. When we were young, we were watching Tomorrow's World and having all these hopes and dreams of this amazing future. We thought we could be anything, do anything, grow up to achieve anything. And whereas now I think, and I come from a multi-generational family, and I watch our young ones struggling to work out what they're going to do. And when Greta said, what's the point of an education or an exam results when the planet's on fire? And it must be the most awful place to be, to not have those hopes and dreams in the same way, and that carelessness and that recklessness of youth that you should all be enjoying. Oddly enough, I might be joining you if I don't succeed in winning this campaign, as I'm going to return to education after 4 decades, and I'll be a student. I'll be attending university, so I will then become a young Green and get involved and feel what it's like. I'd like to say I've been practicing being a young Green for about 5 decades now, but I think the hardest thing to also know is that what you fight for now in your youth, you're going to fight in every decade of your life for your rights, because in the end, the government, the system of government, the system of voting for that government are rigged against the people of every age. And at no point are we the winners in our youth or in our senior years. And I think rather than seeing the differences between us, I think we have to understand, as the IPCC report said, we're all in one boat. We've got 6 years to turn this around, and we need to do it together. Martin?
Sorry, I was rather expecting not to be called upon, but what we have to recognise is that a lot of the ideas that come through that are going to be needed are the ideas that are going to be generated by young people, because they are, as Tina said, living in a very different world. When we grew up, social media wasn't there. When I grew up, internet wasn't there, computers weren't there. I came across them at university and they were great hulking things. But what we need to recognise is that the young, and the young Greens in particular in relation to our party, are the ones who are going to be generating the ideas that we're going to need to be working from. And it's important for us as leaders to be connecting with the various member groups, working groups, the young Greens, working with them, collecting those ideas, interacting, ensuring that what we present reflects the priorities of those groups. So we will depend as much as leaders upon you as you will upon us in terms of supporting you as a group within the party and as a section of the population. Thank you.
You've got 1 minute left.
I'd happily leave it at that, because I expect some of the other things will come up. Obviously, Shara's outlined some of the issues that are affecting people in relation to education, apprenticeship, so on. We also need to look at housing and the rented sector, and the way that that is also a difficulty that affects the autonomy of young people, the independence of young people. And that a lot of things that we took for granted when we were younger are not there for you. But also we need to bear in mind that I'm a father, I'm a grandfather, Tina's the grandmother and mother, and our concern is for those generations. Things are going to get worse, but with luck, I'm not going to live to see them. But what we want to ensure is that we're working as hard as we can on behalf of our children, our grandchildren, and young people everywhere. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. That brought you exactly up to 4 minutes. So perfect timing. You're all very good at this now. I can tell that you've done a lot of hustings at this point. Okay, so we're going to go over to Amelia and Tamsin next for your 4-minute opening speech. So over to you two. I don't know who's going first.
Thank you. These are times to grow our souls. Grace Lee Boggs said that. She was a human rights activist, pivotal in the socialist, civil rights and Black Panther movements in the United States. She recognized and celebrated the spiritual and moral force that it takes to show up, to hold a vision and to build towards it. It's a warm day in London. It's hard to feel easy about that. The disruption of our weather patterns is how we in the global north are experiencing the climate emergency. Those in the majority world, the global south, have been living through emergencies that we created for the past 400 years. The climate emergency is just the latest example of our exploitation, extraction, and consumption destabilizing their lives. The context for this election is unprecedented. The opportunity for us, the Green Party, to rise to this moment with a bold and progressive vision is unprecedented. You're going to hear from both Amelia and I tonight. If you're persuaded by what you hear, please reach out to us to build a Green Party that is inclusive, strong, intersectional, and huge. We are going to need even more from you than you're already giving, and I know that you're giving a lot. But these are times to grow our souls and to be ambitious about what we can achieve when there is a vacuum of moral leadership in our national political debate. The climate emergency has never been more present in the imaginations of the British public. There is a desire for strong climate leadership, and we are the only party with policies fit for that. We're emerging from lockdown and from pandemic. People have experienced how deeply the system is broken, who it serves, and how many of us are left behind. At a time when our government's only offer is deeper cuts, more austerity, and raising taxes for working people, with a Labour Party that won't even propose a wealth tax. There has never been a better moment for us to be on every doorstep, communicating our policies and gathering more members. We live in a world that is waking up to all the systems of oppression that have defined our reality. White supremacy, colonialism, capitalism, patriarchy, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, ableism, sexism, ageism, homophobia, transphobia, the list goes on and on. Now is our moment to build coalitions, reaching out to oppressed and marginalized communities, becoming the political home for a movement of movements that enriches the heart of our party. Amelia and I have the experience and the depth of understanding to grow our membership, to bring more resources into your local party, to win the arguments on the mainstream media stage, and to use all of this to grow our community so that there are more people knocking on more doors, delivering more leaflets, and winning more local and national elections. We are both climate leaders. Amelia has built the Green Party, developed strategies that won us new councillors. She's been our spokesperson in the media and in the leaders' debates. I've worked in business, headed up global campaigns at Lush Cosmetics, founded movements, fundraised millions of pounds, created media strategies that have defined public conversation and changed government policy. Our skills and experience are uniquely complementary to what we need from our party, what is right for our party to demand of itself. So if you're excited about this vision, please reach out to us. We don't just need your vote, we want us with you now, building our campaign so that this is the moment when we can grow our movement and our souls. Thank you.
Exactly 4 minutes again. You're all marvelous at keeping to time. Well done. I'm very impressed. I'm always terrible at timekeeping when I'm speaking. But I'm not going to hold this up because I'm going to hand over to Adrian for our last of the opening speeches. So over to you, Adrian.
Thank you very much, Jane, and thank you, Kelsey. And I'll try to keep to the time as the other candidates have all done. And I'm looking forward to a really positive discussion with fellow candidates and with Young Green members this evening. I'm speaking on behalf of Carla and myself. Carla's got a full council meeting this evening, so sadly this date didn't work for her. And talking to the Young Greens is something that I've been looking forward to do amongst the many list of hustings that we've been enjoying recently. When I joined the Green Party at the age of 16 in the late 90s, there wasn't a Young Greens. I was typically the only member under 25 at party conference in my early couple of years. And I was one of a group of people that was a founding member of the Young Greens in its current form in the early 2000s. So I feel a real affinity with the Young Greens, as does Carla, who's a graduate of the 30 under 30 scheme, which I think has been really important as an example of building up skills and capacity amongst younger members and the leaders of the future. And the Young Greens have a really important role in our party, running vibrant campaigns and helping win elections. And of course, encouraging young people to be involved in politics is so important for all of us. And I'm really inspired by how the Young Greens have got behind Target to Win campaigns and helped local parties elect 17 Young Green councillors in recent years. And that's really dear to my heart because in my 20s as a Green Party member, I was a Young Green councillor. In fact, at 22, I found myself leading a group of Greens in a position of real influence on a no overall control council. I was a Target candidate in a Target constituency. I was deputy leader. And of course, Carla, after doing 30 under 30, has soon become a councillor and Target candidate herself. So we're really used to being part of the Young Greens, and the sorts of campaigns that we've been involved in fighting are very similar to the sorts of campaigns that need to be fought today. For example, opposing tuition fees. We need to be fighting for free education. Opposing privatisation of public services. Never has that been more important than today, with making sure that we have properly resourced and fairly funded public services. And of course, policies like votes at 16 and really reinvigorating our democracy have always been central to what Green politics is about. So the sorts of campaigns that I was involved in as a Young Green, I think, are ever more important today, as are issues such as supporting the climate strikers and making sure that the case for a fair, inclusive society with a Green New Deal that tackles the climate and ecological emergency is at the forefront of our campaigns. So I think it's the role of leaders to support the Young Greens in their campaigning, to engage with Young Greens, to ensure Young Greens are well represented in the party, and that we work together and mobilise our movement for a fair, inclusive society and for real action on the climate. Carla and I are standing because we want to build an effective... Thank you, Jade. We want to build an effective and inclusive party. We want to win power and influence in every corner of England and Wales. And we want to gain more Green MPs and communicate our big green ideas to transform society. We believe that our professional and political experience can help lead a step change in how our party operates. We're the only candidates in this election that have been elected Greens, that are used to taking that message to the wider public and winning that support that we need to take the Green Party to the next level. We've seen polls in the last 24 hours showing the party on 10%. We've frequently been in third place, and now we need that professional and political experience of reaching to the wider public that's going to enable us to take the party to the next level. So we'd really welcome your support. We look forward to a really positive discussion tonight, so we can build the Green Party into a real electoral force, win power and influence in every corner of England and Wales, and transform society to build a brighter future together. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. That was pretty much on 4 minutes as well. I feel like you all get medals now for being exactly on 4 minutes. Well done. I also now feel like I've turned into your school teacher, which is a bit weird. But anyway, we're going to move on from opening speeches, and I'm going to hand over to Kelsey to ask some questions that have come in from our Young Greens. So over to you, Kelsey, for our questions.
Thanks so much, Jane, and thank you all for being amazing at timings. This is worrying. I hope we can keep to the standard. Yeah, as Jane has said, I'm going to put forward the questions that have been submitted from Young Greens. So I'll ask these just to remind. We'll have 2 minutes per response, and I will rudely interrupt you when you've got 30 seconds left. Just reminding you of that. I hope that's okay. And so without any further speak from me, I will put the first question, and I'll just warn you ahead of reading the question, so you've got a little bit of time of the first two respondees, which will be Amelia and Tamsin, and then Adrian. So the first question we have for you is, how will you put pressure on the government to see that students and young people can be supported in the best possible way moving forward from the pandemic? And that will go into the chat, and I'll go to Amelia and Tamsin.
There are multiple strands of what needs to change right now. When we look at the government, we see a successive number of governments that have marginalised young people in their policies. Tamsin and I are both 36, and we have both paid tuition fees. We have both, well, I've worked 0-hour contracts. We've both lived through this time of austerity where cuts to our community completely tore them apart and meant those basic safety nets weren't there to support our friends, our neighbours, our family. We know what living through these times can be like, but we also know that the challenges that you face are incredibly different as well. We must be challenging the government on every aspect of their policy that undermines young people. And I have worked to do that in my role as deputy leader across the last 7 years. I worked to ensure that we spoke out when young people's benefits, housing benefits, were being cut. I spoke out about the fact that young people don't have pay equality in the 21st century. We know that there should be equal pay for equal work, but it will take campaigning to ensure that we get that. I was there when we spoke out about scrapping tuition fees, but not just that, actually getting rid of student debt as well. And I am proud of those young people that brought that policy forward to our conference to ensure that we were challenging the economics of this Conservative government and prove that previous Labour governments, and prove that another way was possible.
30 seconds.
But also, we need to be ensuring that Votes at 16 is one of the next big wins for our country, because it's through representation and getting more young Greens elected and young people elected, but it's through those votes that you have your strongest voice and your strongest opportunity to ensure that those policies that support your generation are heard.
Thanks so much. And on to Adrian.
Thank you, Kelsey. There are so many ways in which young people's futures are being mortgaged and threatened by this government and by policies of consistent governments. What we've seen with tuition fees, with the way that transport services are being eroded, with the way that we see private rents going up all the time, with a move towards a more and more unfair tax system, increasing national insurance rather than higher rates of income tax to fund social care. Policies are going in the wrong direction. We're seeing a more unequal society and more regressive policies. And we need to be at the forefront of challenging that, particularly when the supposed official opposition in this country in the Labour Party is not being the voice for a fair future that we would hope it would be. So I think it's really important that as leaders, we're not just campaigning on these issues, but we're working with young Greens, with communities, to make sure that the government is challenged at every turn, challenged to ensure that strong public transport is in place and that there's proper funding for students to be able to get about without having to pay high travel fares. Funding to ensure that not only do we have no tuition fees, but that historical debt is written off as was promised in our last general election manifesto. That we have proper controls over the private rented sector, which particularly affects students and young people, and that we put a strong, thank you, and that we put a strong emphasis on tackling the climate and ecological emergency and supporting those climate strikers who are an inspiration in reminding all of us that it's the future of young generations and of people around the world today that is being threatened by our failure to create a fairer future and the Green New Deal that we know can deliver a better and brighter future for everybody.
Thanks so much, Adrian. Next is Shara.
Thanks, Kelsey. Well, so many good points have been made already. But I would say you can split green policies and green politics essentially into two domains. And the first domain is one in which we are acting universally for the rights and benefits of all. And one of those key planks of our policy would be a citizen's income, which hasn't been mentioned yet, the citizen's income actually would lift out of poverty trap so many in society, young adults included, and it would allow and enable them. And obviously it would have to be joined with abolition of student tuition fees to make it meaningful. It would allow people to pursue and progress creative and imaginative projects and education for its own sake. Because when I come across students, and at the moment I'm working in the medical arena, I've come across students who are doing, in this case, a 5 degree, and some of them may have doing intercalated degree, ending up with £100,000 in debt, even before they've graduated. And this also then feeds into a vicious circle, if you like, of anxiety, because they're struggling to make ends meet as students and are feeling incredibly distressed at the prospect of mounting debt after. So we need to make sure, finally, that when people are in university or outside university, they have meaningful jobs, for example, through the Green New Deal, and these are sustainable jobs with sustainable incomes, with a whole raft of basic needs which are met: housing, education, and health.
Thanks so much. On to Ashley. I think you're muted, Ashley.
Ashley, you're muted. We can't hear you.
I keep thinking you're going to unmute us before we speak, which is why I don't do it. I don't want to interfere with your mute button. Sorry. Okay, to repeat, I'm a teacher and I go from school to school and college, also colleges, and I've watched the education in those deteriorate markedly. And the reason is because of government interference. And what needs to be done is that there should be a root and branch change to the education system, which should be put in the hands of educators, not government ministers. Because it's not just about the fact that it's become a tool which teaches students how to pass exams in order to get into university, which is one expectation too much for many pupils, but there's an agenda as well. And it seems that this government in particular is trying to sort out the wheat from the chaff. And it's not just about passing the examinations and getting the qualifications to get to university, but it's also a way of pricing people out so that you get a certain type of person going through university. And then, of course, that has a knock-on effect, because when people come out at the other side, there aren't the jobs unless you go to a particular university. So the whole business of sorting the wheat happens again and again and again. And so you're being priced out of the job market. And what we need is to make sure that the people who don't pay their taxes, i.e. large corporations who are going to benefit from the workforce that comes out of schools and universities, and the wealthy people who have businesses that are going to benefit from the people that come out of schools and universities, should pay in order to fund an education system that has a knock-on effect, which means that there will be people who are qualified in not just the academic subjects, but in vocational as well, to do the jobs that we need to have done in a new green economy, which will address the climate catastrophe as well. And that is what I would be pushing for the government to do if I had any position of power to do so. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. Just to remind candidates, we can keep 2 minutes, and if we get towards the end, I'll say finish your sentence. You can kind of keep it brief from there. Finally, for this question, Martin and Tina.
So post-COVID, so as we come out of this lockdown, and life moves on. I think we've all coming out of it in a very different way than when we went into it. No one could have been unchanged by this. But I think if we look for any hope in the government, then all hope was lost and abandoned during lockdown, watching them take PPE contracts and give them to their mates. And our frontline workers, my niece is a nurse, suffered with poor quality PPE or no availability of PPE. These were deeply worrying times. I think three things that would bother me for our young and our family, and certainly for all of you, are education, healthcare, and climate. On education, I feel like we're training our young still to be cogs in a wheel of capitalism, and a capitalism that cannot survive because the planet won't survive, and nor will anyone's way of life. So we need to look at not just making education available to everybody and free. We actually need to look at the content and the method and the delivery of that education and the training that's going to be needed to help young people to face a future that the government is just not facing the reality of. As for healthcare, again, the climate emergency is going to increase our dependence on healthcare. Pollution is already responsible for so many deaths and so much ill health, and we need to make sure that we protect that for you. And in the end, it's the economy as well, because educated and healthy people prepared for society are no burden to society. They enrich it and help it. And we need all the help we're going to get along the way with the climate emergency. So the young people we need to train and appropriate. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And thank you all for answering that first question. You'll be pleased to know that we've got through one. So the next question, and again, just a heads up for the first two respondees, I feel like that's going to be a word, will be Shara and then Ashley. And so our next question for you, apologies, I'm flicking between documents. The Young Green co-chairs have seats on GPEx. I apologise, this is completely my bad. There's also a helicopter going over my house at the moment. Can I give me 2 seconds for that to go? The Young Green co-chairs have seats on GPEx. How do you want to work with the Young Greens co-chairs and the wider executive to ensure that the voices of and the issues particularly relevant to young people and students are heard within the wider party? And I'll post again in the chat. And as I say, we'll start with Shara.
Well, firstly, I should congratulate and commend everybody, including Young Greens, who stood in the recent crop of GPEx elections. Not all of you will have come through. I think Rosie Rawle got elected as local party support, so many congratulations to her. And I just think it's really imperative, it's vital that our Young Greens are involved in all the decision making and reflection that goes into the well-being and the strategy of the party. And I've served as your deputy leader. Some of you will have been in the party at that time, 2014 to 2016. And I know how important it was to not just attend GPEx, but to play a full part in the meetings and outside the meetings. And I would say as one among equals. And that's my watchword, really, because in life, in professional life, and also within the party, I'm a great fan and advocate of accountability. And I think that there's hand in glove with accountability is representation. And no doubt the Young Greens co-chairs will also see themselves, rightly so, as representatives of the Young Green members. But I think it's also very important to act in concert on external identifiable goals. And I think that there is one area where I feel as if there may even have been, if I can dare to use the word, some dysfunction in the party, that we cannot align on, sorry, is that 10 seconds or 30 seconds?
30 seconds.
Sorry. It's now rapidly diminishing. I'll just carry on until you stop me. As one amongst equals, I would want to ensure that your voice is included and that your concerns and priorities are attended to, whether it's in election campaigning, because I don't like to think of us as them and us, right? There is a sense, I think, in which the Young Greens, oh, can they come and help us in this general election, by-election now? No. Thank you. You are part of the lifeblood of the party, And so we must act together in mutually respectful terms, not just as a commodity.
Thanks. And next is Ashley.
I would go further than Shara in that respect, because I believe that it's not a case of you being a part of the party, but you are the future of the party. And therefore, what I see my role as being, should I be leader, is more of a handover, because our time for doing any of the active work is coming to an end, and the baton has to be passed over, and you are the future, not of the party, just of the party, but of the world, because we have an agenda that needs to be pushed out there if we are to avoid a climate catastrophe. And your youth, your enthusiasm, and your intelligence and your intellect, and there is a difference between the two, are requirements that we need to encourage to take this party forward. It is up to you. It is not up to us to use your abilities. It is up to you to use your abilities now and move this party forward. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And to Martin and Tina.
Yeah, thanks, Kelsey. We need to bear in mind that the current context is that there are various moves going on to change the constitution of the party, which may change the governance structures of the party and mean that in a couple of years' time, there won't be Young Greens on GPEx because there isn't a GPEx. It'll be something different. But let's assume it's not going to change. At the moment, the role of GPEx is in the day-to-day management of the party. It's one of those that, as a member of Standing Orders Committee, and I used to be on regional council as well, we often come across conflicts within GPEx. And it's very important because of the way in which Tina and I want to approach unity within the party, that we focus on ensuring that GPEx is working well. And in that, the Young Green co-chairs have an important role to play. Most of those on GPEx have particular roles. They have a brief. They're concerned with local party support, as Rosie now is. But there are those that have a sort of a broader view. They don't have a specific brief within the party, and the Young Green co-chairs are in that position. They're able to bring in a broad view that goes across the range of things that GPEx do. And they could represent an important influence on the way in which GPEx operates. And it's very important at the moment that GPEx does operate well, because we are making our way forward, and we need to ensure that the party is doing the things that we need to have done for the party. So not just electoral campaigning, which is important, but also campaigning on issues. And that's a role that GPEx can facilitate. And the Young Greens, I know, are anxious to be out there and campaigning. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. And next is Amelia and Tamsin.
Thank you so much for this question. Yeah, GPEx. I mean, we really need to fix the turnout for the GPEx elections, and I would be really excited to be working with the Young Greens to uplift, make more transparent, make more accessible the work that GPEx are doing, so that the membership knows about GPEx, knows what it's up to, and it turns out for those elections, because it's so crucial that GPEx has the full weight of membership behind it, and also the scrutiny of that membership as well. So yes, let's work together on that. GPEx, it can be inaccessible. It's not as transparent as we would hope. So I think more solidarity and support for Young Greens joining. You know, Amelia as deputy leader has worked over the past 7 years hard with Young Greens. I think you'll probably all recognize that fact. And she's ensured paid support on multiple occasions for Young Greens in their different roles. And I think in terms of, you know, making sure that the support goes beyond just the GPEx representation, but is also for Young Greens on all of the various committees that they find themselves on. I suppose last of all, I'd say that when I was on GPEx, I worked with Hannah and Sam, and what I found was that Young Greens, yes, of course, they represent young people's concerns, but actually you ensure that our party represents and works for other oppressed and marginalized communities. You bring those oppressed and marginalized communities into the forefront of what we as Green Party members are thinking about. And, you know, I would just uplift and amplify that work as much as possible. It's central to Amelia's and my candidacy. And if you want to read more about it, check out our Liberation Manifesto.
Thanks so much, Tamsin. And finally, Adrian.
Thanks, Kelsey. And I think it's a really important question. So as you say, the co-chairs of the Young Greens are on GPEx. And even if, as Martin was suggesting, that there are changes in the next few years to the Constitution, we don't know whether that will be the case. We need to make sure Young Greens are well represented in the successor bodies, such as the Council proposed under the Holistic Review, and indeed on policies on bodies such as Political Committee. And I think a regular dialogue between the leadership and the Young Greens, including the co-chairs as Young Greens representatives, is really important, so that there's an exchange of insights, ideas, and of Young Greens positions on those key issues that GPEx is considering. And it's important that the leadership helps directly and sets the framework for ensuring Young Greens can play an active role at every level of the party. When I was a Young Green, I was really fortunate to be able to serve as a councillor and indeed lead, at the time, the biggest group of Green councillors in the country. I was a target candidate. I became deputy leader when I was still in my 20s. Those opportunities to support the next generation of leaders, of activists, of organisers, of MPs, of spokespeople are so important. And so providing funding and support for initiatives like 30 Under 30 or new training and inclusivity measures, I think are incredibly important, supporting those candidates. So we want to work with the Young Greens to ensure that the party makes the most of all of our talents, is genuinely inclusive, and we've set out in our manifesto and in our platform on our website how we want to work with the liberation groups to ensure that the party promotes genuine inclusivity in the party, and I think the Young Greens have a really important role to play in ensuring that happens.
Thanks so much, Adrian, and thanks everyone for answering the second of our questions. The next question, some Young Greens might recognise from our own hustings just last month, I think, 2 months ago, which is, when is a time when you have changed your mind on a political issue, and what made you change your mind? And I should have said beforehand, I apologise, so I'll give a couple of seconds to plug that the person who will be answering is Martin and Tina, and then Shara. So I will talk for a little bit to let you have a quick think, because I recognise you're going first and I'm filling some time, and I will go over to Martin and Tina now.
I'll take this first, I think. I changed my whole life and my whole mind completely when Occupy started soon after the Arab Spring. You know, having not spent my life as an activist or doing anything of worth and payback for planet, I went down just because I was so fed up seeing our government give bailouts to banks and yet take it off the disabled people's allowance. And I just saw the Arab Spring opening up and thought, these people are amazing. They're taking so much risk with their own lives just to stand up for what's right and true, and realized that I wasn't doing that for anyone. And I didn't have any personal problems that needed addressing, but I felt like I should be still contributing. So I went to Occupy and I sat in circles for months and heard from people I'd never heard from, because although I've lived all over the world and traveled vastly and had all sorts of different lives, in the end, it was never really outside of your own type of circle. And until you sit down with strangers in a circle and discuss political issues, then you don't understand. There was a woman one evening during a General Assembly who was the most profound and intellectual woman I'd heard. And yet when it was over, she put all her bags in the shopping trolley and went back to walking around London with a shopping trolley. And it dawned on me that the quietest voices are very rarely heard, and they should be elevated and amplified. And if these people aren't able to do it themselves, then we should speak for them. Because I think that just because you can hear people doesn't mean they're right. It just means they're louder. And I think that my opinion changed in that I now seek out the quiet voices to find some way of hearing what gifts they have to bring.
Thank you, Tina, and to Shara.
Thanks, Kelsey. I think I might have seen this question on Twitter somewhere, and I had already been thinking about it, so that's good, even if you'd come to me first. It's a brilliant question, it really is, because what I most like about it is the idea that we can change our minds. And I just feel as if we need to give each other space, even within our own party, to be able to do that. Because changing your mind is a good thing, to align either with a plan which hasn't gone well, or with a political idea or value which needs to be reprioritized. So the topic where I have certainly changed my mind is a matter of great importance to us, actually. And also affects our politics and has affected it for the last few years. And I'm thinking of the EU referendum. Now, I mean, in 2016, when I was there with Jean Lambert at the Count Centre in the Guildhall in London, it was totally demoralising just to see the votes come in, and we had to leave in the early hours because we couldn't face it because the result was clear. And after that, I would say that for any Green, there was a potential conflict. And it's that conflict which I had to resolve. And the conflict was between what exactly? It was between campaigning for a second referendum or acknowledging the result. And as Democrats, actually, why was that a conflict? Because we had always said, we'd even campaigned for the first referendum. We said that we would deliver
30 seconds
and acknowledge that verdict. And I'm afraid I don't think we did that at all. And why was it particularly problematic for us? Because the amount of political energy which had been expended in Parliament through all those debates, while all that was going on, the number one thing that I was thinking of was the climate and ecological emergency, and what I would give to bottle that energy in Parliament and redirect it towards the climate and ecological emergency. So that's the thing on which I changed my mind. Whilst I was campaigning for a second referendum, I wished that we weren't campaigning for a second referendum.
Thanks, Shara. Next is Amelia and Tamsin.
I quite recently have changed my mind on something. It was when trans people were coming to me and saying that they felt like they had to leave the party as a result of transphobia. I said, no, stay. We can work in solidarity to ensure that that we are putting rights in place, ensure that we are building a stronger party, and we are working together to ensure that we are working for social justice and environmental justice and workers' rights, and all of these things that we have as our priorities. In fact, interestingly, when Tamsin and I decided that we'd run together, Tamsin had thought that they'd left the party because of transphobia. And I was like, this proves my point of, isn't it great when people come together and we can do something incredible and change something? But now I've seen the impact of that transphobia and the impact on people's mental health and that impact of people basically having to fight for their basic right to exist, to just be in the space in the Green Party. Now I've seen the toll it takes on people. I think you shouldn't have to pay to be in a political party to experience that. And I've really, it's been quite tough to really hear and understand the stories that people have had of their experiences in our party that we all love and we all want to improve, and we all want to be a welcoming space for everyone. So I obviously hope that people don't leave, but I also do hope that Tamsin and I provide a little bit of a candle of hope in some of these experiences that people have had, that we can do something powerful and we can make a difference for people's lives.
Thanks, Amelia. And next to Adrian.
Thanks, Kelsey. So the example I've got is perhaps a little bit more specific than some of the other candidates have chosen, and maybe even slightly more dull, but it's also an honest one. So I've been in the Green Party since I was 16. And so in terms of my values and in terms of the things that I care about, I can't say that I've got major examples of big issues of the day where I've changed my mind. However, I do think in terms of the specifics of how we go about delivering those principles of a green and fair and compassionate society, that we need to take an evidence-based approach to the best policies that can be used to bring that about. I currently work in the field of renewable energy and green homes. I lead a renewable energy charity. And one of the things that's caused me to do is to study in some detail the different areas of energy policy that are needed to deliver a zero carbon future. And the party policy at the moment is a bit vague in certain areas, including in relation to hydrogen. And I think we need to be a lot clearer on that. And I've certainly become clearer in my mind that the government's current approach of promoting blue hydrogen, which is essentially just energy from fossil fuels, it is a complete false solution. And in fact, if you look at some of the vested interests that are promoting those so-called solutions, it's often the fossil fuel industries that are trying to get the government to put focus and investment and attention into hydrogen.
30 seconds.
So of course, hydrogen from blue sources from fossil fuels is not decarbonising anything. Green hydrogen potentially could, if it's from renewable sources and if there's enough of it, but we need to be ensuring that particularly for policies like greening our homes, which is my professional area at the moment, we need to rely on technologies that are currently out there of insulation, of heat pumps, of putting the investment into ensuring people can afford those solutions that will address fuel poverty. So let's make sure we're wise to some of these greenwash solutions that are out there, like blue hydrogen.
Thanks, Adrian, and finally to Ashley. I think you might be on mute, Ashley. Ashley, we still can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
There we go.
Sorry. Yeah, my change of heart is akin to Sharar's, actually. To my embarrassment, I must admit that I toyed with the idea of voting to leave because I was so fed up with what the business club that the European Union had been, and maybe still is. But I weighed things up, and I actually voted for us to go into the common market when it was first put forward in the vote, where we won it by over two-thirds majority. And it seemed to me farcical that eventually the vote was won by a 52 to 48% margin. It seems ridiculous that after all this time, we just threw it all away. And I'm so glad that I voted to stay, but unfortunately we've lost so much because of what has happened with Brexit. And the one thing that we've got to do is get rid of this Tory government that got us into this mess in order that we can repair some of the damage that has been caused by this Tory party with our friends abroad. And we do need now, it looks more and more, ties with Europe, and we need to repair our relationships with Europe in order that we can move forward as a nation.
Thanks so much, Ashley, and thanks everyone for answering that question and for using your voices. So our next question, and again, a bit of a heads up for the first two people responding, will be Adrian and then Martin and Tina. And the question is short. How would you define transphobia? And I'll go to Adrian.
I think, well, thank you for the question. And so Carla and I are very clear in our approach to all issues of equality and liberation, that we need to take an approach of nothing about us without us. And so that includes engaging with the liberation groups within the party and more broadly in society in terms of how we address these issues. I think the fundamental principle here is that people have a right to determine their own gender and to express themselves in a way that they are comfortable with and reflects who they are. And so I think it's then incumbent on other people in society to respect that. So that's the approach that I would define. Now, I'm really alarmed and concerned about the nature of some of the discussion that I've seen in society more generally and sometimes in the party. And I'm alarmed when I hear that there are people who've decided to leave the party or feel they have no choice but to leave the party because they feel attacked, and particularly if they feel attacked because of who they are, or they're feeling like they're needing to fight for their right to exist. At the same time, in taking some time to talk to trans people in the party under the principle of nothing about us without us, which I think is important on all liberation issues. Thank you. I'm clear that we need to, so trans people have suggested to me, and I think it's right, that we need to take the time to create spaces where people can understand each other, understand our party policy and our shared mission, and have the space to be able to learn and perhaps make genuine mistakes in understanding how to engage and how to address people in the right way. But if that then extends to things like deliberately misgendering or abuse, then that's where we need to be clear that there are some red lines.
Thanks, Adrian. And next to Martin and Tina.
I'm going to have to admit that for many of us in the party, and I know so many, we are out of our depth with a question like this. You know, this may have been a consuming conversation for some in the party, but for many, particularly when Sian resigned with that letter, I got questions from members saying, what is she talking about? Because for a lot of us, you know, we're not paying attention to the internal matters. And, you know, people are out campaigning, being councillors, standing at roadsides. And when you do come to the subject, of which I've had to come to with a rapid learning experience through this, you are confused by the terminology, the implications of terminology, and not understanding how other people are feeling and their pain, and what it is that perhaps some of us don't really understand about the lived experience of others, because I know what it's like to live as a woman for the last 59 years, but I don't know what it's like to be someone who is looking to identify into a different gender. I don't understand how that feels, how that works. The trans friends that I do have, I certainly, Ash Routh has an amazing pinned post on Twitter that's very worthwhile reading, and it helps to explain a great deal. So no, how do I define transphobia? No one should be mean, no one should be cruel. If you have a way of wanting to be described, then let's go with that. Let's not upset people for the sake of it. In life, you need more allies than enemies. And I think as Green Party members, we have to remember who the actual enemy is. And it shouldn't be found within our groups. And we need to address the lack of awareness of any problems or how this feels for others. So yeah, I'm finding it hard to define. I'm sorry.
Thanks, Tina. And next to Ashley.
Well, my reading of transphobia is anybody who is not willing to accept trans people. I am just as Tina is a novice in this world that has suddenly grown, especially within the party. But I am taking the time to find out what the problems are. And I have actually spoken with Ash Routh about this. And although I can't now, because I need to have more information, I can't just now campaign on the issue. I feel that we're losing something by not embracing this moment. And I find that a lot of what the arguments that are happening have been because of people's non-awareness of what the situation is, what the law is, and being able to not just deal with somebody, but actually embrace somebody who's of a different gender to you. We're losing so much. And not just time in the party, we're losing so much by not delving into
30 seconds,
finding out exactly what it is that is the nub between people who are trans and those who are not, and those who are fighting against it without getting the full information. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. Next to Shara.
Thanks, Kelsey. So look, let's just answer this question very literally. You've asked, how would you define transphobia? Well, in a literal sense, it's quite clear. It's hatred or fear of trans people. And if you want to go into more detail, then you can find a definition. And I think it's very important to know what it is that you're naming, because one of the main problems that we face in our party is the use of allegations to stifle debate. And I see this happening regularly. Sian's statement's been mentioned. What we must avoid is innuendo and referring or implying that people or a spokesperson has been transphobic without evidence. We must use evidence. When I have successfully had complaints against me dismissed, it was because, guess what? I insisted on a clear definition of transphobia. I think it must have been a Young Green comment on one of the recent hustings, that they were surprised how much they agreed with me, except of course, there's the problem of transphobia. Well, I put it to that Young Green, if you're here, and any others who were surprised how much they agreed with me, look into the means by which you arrive at your belief processes, because it's very important that all of us in this party feel safe and protected, not just to speak our mind, but to be sensitive and inclusive towards everybody. Emilia also mentioned something which is very high on my list, to include everybody in our party and make sure they're included. So at the same time, we have women leaving this party, and there are many statements now from women who have left, and the reasons they have given is they feel that it's a hostile environment for them. So let's make sure, and I have done my homework, that you elect a leader who is not just going to brush the problems under the carpet. Let's make sure that we debate rationally and sensitively towards all, and not make disparaging accusations and allegations about people without evidence.
Thanks, Shara. And finally to Emilia and Tamsin.
Thank you for this question. I'm going to try to answer it. It has a particular cost to me. So yes, it's dislike or prejudice against trans people. That's what transphobia means. Maybe more broadly, what does it mean to live in a transphobic society? For that, I need more than 2 minutes. Although I do have the lived experience of misgendering myself daily when I'm given 2 binary options on gender, of encountering a 6-year waiting list when I tried to access trans healthcare that would affirm my gender, of hearing transphobic tropes that are put out there to create a moral panic around the identities of trans women who are women, when what we could be talking or should be talking about is the cost of patriarchy on all women. I'm going to tell you briefly about how it is that Emilia and I decided to run together. Sian threw down the gauntlet, something that had provoked me to really step back from the party because I didn't feel like anyone was taking it seriously or talking about it, was suddenly given a national platform. And to her, I'm very grateful for that, because it felt like there was space for us to actually come forward and have this conversation. I reached out to Emilia because I felt that she could have somebody on her ticket, not necessarily me, any trans person. There are many in our party who could advocate on our behalf rather than having cis people talking about or debating our experience. And so that's why we did this. In terms of reaching out, we need an education program. We need it to be delivered to every single local party. We need it to be at every single conference. We need not only the lived experience of trans people, but the lived experience of all oppressed and marginalized people, so that we can represent those people and platform them and include them in our party.
Thanks so much, Tamsin, and thanks everyone again for that question. And thanks for doing quite well for keeping to time as well. Again, as a heads up for our next question, the first people to respond will be Ashley and then Emilia and Tamsin. And this is our last serious question. This question says, over 8,000 people with disabilities last year were attacked either physically or online due to their disability. What will you do to help raise this issue and keep the government accountable? And we'll go to Ashley. I think you're on mute, Ashley.
This is actually a reflection of the society that we're living in at the moment. And we are becoming less and less tolerant. And I hate to use the word tolerance because you shouldn't have to tolerate anybody. I'd rather use the word embrace. But people in this day and age are unfortunately angrier than they've ever been and not as accepting as they should be and ever were. And unfortunately, it's the people who are less able who are the target. People are found to be scapegoats, and often it's the people who others would deem as a drain, if you like. And one of the things that we've got to do is to keep pushing this government and anybody else who doesn't agree that people with disabilities need to have a voice. They need to be included into our society. That everything that they need to be included into our society should be provided for them. And therefore, that is the thing that I would do. I would push this government to actually see that these people are not just a drain on our resources, but can contribute to society in positive ways that they know nothing of. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. And Amelia and Tamsin.
Such an important question. And I know that there have been a lot of problems that have been facing disabled people across hundreds of years, but are certainly across the last 10 years as well. We talk about the cuts and that young people have faced the brunt of the cuts and disabled people have as well. We need to be making sure that we are highlighting those intersections so that our governments don't undermine the rights of anybody, but certainly disabled people, because we live in an inaccessible society. We live in a society that disables people. It's a society that means that it's not accessible to ensure that we can have equal lives. And I think we need to challenge that very premise of a broken system and a broken structure that doesn't enable true equality. And then those attacks that have come out are just horrific to read about. Again, we talk about our learning program and our liberation manifesto because we want to ensure that we are platforming diverse voices, including diverse voices of disabled people. But those attacks have actually been to meetings with Twitter to talk about how social media beds in prejudice and challenging a lot of the stuff that's been happening on social media with some of their officers. And I think that it's, again, those intersections are so important. I feel like we often have quite a Western perspective on how that works and not understanding the global implications of how social media has become a hostile place for so many people.
Thank you, and to Adrian.
Well, I think as with all issues around inclusion and diversity, we need and liberation, we need to take the principle of nothing about us without us. And within the Green Party, that needs to mean engaging with the disability group and also with disability groups in wider society to address the issues that affect people. We talked about these really crucial and worrying issues in a hustings the other day, and several of us as candidates highlighted the fact that as a party we have a really progressive policy of promoting the social model of disability. So we recognise that if people have impairments, then it's incumbent upon us as society to make sure that people are not then disabled from playing a full and active role in society, and that it's the policies we have as a society that can enable people to feel fully included. So the Green Party promoting those policies is crucial, and that's right across the board, whether it's around physical access, whether it's around strong mental health services, whether it's around challenging the horrendous cuts that we've seen to benefits, the growing rents in the private sector in particular that disproportionately affect disabled people and vulnerable people. We need to be really strong and loud in addressing these issues and in tackling some of the prejudices and misunderstandings that can be behind vile attacks that you referred to in the question. So I think we need to be proud of our policy and stand together with disabled people to address prejudice and ensure that social policies are not leaving people behind.
Thanks, Adrian, and to Martin and Tina.
Thank you. This is a serious one. As Adrian has referred to, we have the social model, but we are required to have that under the Equality Act anyway, and to make use of it in terms of the language that we use and the way we approach things. And it's very important that we are using language in the correct way all the time, because that's part of the issue, that the people with impairment are disabled from access to those things. And one of the issues we have to address within the party is that issue of accessibility. Accessibility to conference, accessibility to local parties, accessibility to Zooms like this, which may in part be related to impairment. But the question itself was about the attacks taking place. And we have to recognize the role that government has taken in that, in creating the idea that people with impairment are a drain, very often suggesting that people who appear to be impaired are faking it or not recognizing the significance of hidden impairment for individuals. And those are things that have to be recognized. And then setting up barriers, which again are designed to create the idea that people with impairment are a drain. Things like the work capability assessment, which is designed to make it difficult for those people who need to be assessed, who need to be provided with the resources that they need following that assessment.
30 seconds.
And we need to be concentrating our effort inside the party, outside the party, on supporting those with impairment, working, as Adrian has said, with Greens of Disability, but all the time pressing the government on the issues that are required, that are important for fairness towards all individuals in society.
Thanks, Martin. And finally to Shara.
Well, I would start by saying many of our candidates have spoken beautifully already. Adrian has spoken about the social model of disability, and I couldn't put it better. But the idea that you reframe and look again at somebody's impairment, it could be a physical impairment, a real impairment with an organ, for example, a sensory organ, and you organize society and put the infrastructure and investment into it to enable them to be empowered and to play a full part in society. I think this is fundamental. I mean, I tried once to act as though, because I felt that I needed more empathy. As a student, I tried to act as if I couldn't hear what was going on around me for about a week, and seeing how difficult it was. And around about the same time, I went on a journey with a wheelchair user on the London Underground, just to try and see how difficult it was for them to navigate their way around. And I just think, as has been said also, nothing about us without us. The us is everybody at the end of the day. The us are those without the deficit who need to overcome through anti-discrimination initiatives to make sure that those people who are affected in our society can play a full and active part. In terms of the role of online bullying, harassment, or discrimination, we've seen also just yesterday a report around the rise in unsolicited sexual advances towards children by other children, especially boys towards girls at school age. I mean, this is a horrendous problem in our society that we really are going to have to think more creatively, and even not so creatively, because many of the solutions are already known about.
Finish up the
in terms
sentence.
of avoiding offensive content and acting properly and investigating and charging and criminalizing that activity.
Thanks, Shara, and thanks everyone for answering that question. We've got through the serious questions that I've put them, but as I'm sure many of you who attended Young Greens Hustings before know, we like to have a fun question. Now, I think some of the candidates are already aware that our typical biscuit question has been stolen this year, so we've had to come up with a new one. But just to clarify, I put down a minute for maximum responses for this one. We're running quite close to time, so if we can keep this as short as possible, but keep it fun. But yeah, an absolute deadline of a minute, if that's okay. And again, as always, not doing this question any less service than the others. The first to respond will be Martin and Tina, and then Amelia and Tamsin. And the question is, if you could trade places with any other person for a week, famous or not, living or dead, real or fictional, with whom would it be? And so over to Martin and Tina.
I don't know, maybe, is this cheating? Like, I'd like to change places with my younger self. So I was more aware, more alert, and more clued up, much like I see in the Young Greens. I watch the Young Greens and I think to myself, wow, I didn't have that at your age. I didn't have that awareness, and that awareness of my own power. I didn't get that until I was in my 40s. So yeah, I'd swap with my younger self. Is there time for Martin to slip one in there?
Yeah.
I had actually contemplated giving exactly the same answer that Tina has just given, but the slightly more serious one is I'd actually like to change for a week with one of my parents, probably my mother, to see what her perception on life was that essentially has made me the person that I am.
Thanks both, and to Amelia and Tamsin.
This family idea is so beautiful. It makes me kind of grieve for and like celebrate the people who made me who I am. But I think it would just have to be Frida Kahlo, because she is just so boss, and I just want to be like in the midst of all of the conversations and the political radicalness and the mad hopefulness and ambition of her artistic and creative vision.
My answer to anything that involves something with a person is always the same, and that's David Attenborough. I just feel that his knowledge about the natural world and his timeline, his knowledge of how this world has changed over the years that he's been traveling and looking at different ecosystems is just incredible. Depressing, I'm sure, as well, but who wouldn't want to have more David Attenborough in their life?
Thanks both, and to Shara.
Thanks for this question. The person I would most want to be is Rosa Parks. And she's somebody who gives me great inspiration, actually. And just cast your mind back, if you can, to 1955 Alabama. And here is a woman who's tired physically, and she refuses to give in to a racist request to give up her seat. And that's the regime. And she's threatened with the police, and she goes, well, I know that. And later on in her interview, she talks about people sometimes say, the reason I didn't get up was because I was tired. Well, the only tired she was tired of giving in. And I think it's really important for us to think about inspirational figures and moments in history, because they can actually shift opinion. And I think she helped give rise to a civil rights movement, which we're living today, and still trying to overcome some of that prejudice today in the Black Lives Matters movement. So yeah, Rosa Parks for me.
Thanks, Shara, and to Ashley.
Yeah, well, the boss person for me at the moment is Greta Thunberg. So that is who I would like to be. I would have loved to have had the opportunity to go on that mission, because that's what it is. That's what she's here for. She is here to tell the older people of this planet that if you can't lend a hand, get out of the way, because this is a pivotal moment in time, and she is the person, as far as I'm concerned, and I've said this to pupils in schools where I've done environmental studies, that she is actually my hero. And that is the person that I would have liked to have been.
Thanks, Ashley, and finally to Adrian.
Well, I'm loving all the answers to this question. So I think for me, I would like to trade places with a grassroots climate activist in the global south, someone who is seeing the effects of climate change here and now and working with their community to address that. And I say that as someone who, I come from a reasonably modest background, but in global terms, a very privileged background as someone who's campaigned on climate issues in the global north, and given my gender and ethnicity and sexuality, I know that I'm in a position of privilege. So to trade places with someone who isn't in that position of privilege and is working and is at the sharp end of the impacts of climate change and the overconsumption that the global north has been benefiting from for so long, I think it would be just eye-opening to have that exchange.
Thanks, Adrian, and thanks everyone for answering all of our questions. And I think that's it from me. So I'll pass back to Jane for the next part.
Thank you, Kelsey. And yes, thank you all for your answers. I especially found the last ones very interesting. It's first time using that question, but we are coming to the end now. So we are going to give you all 2 minutes for closing speeches. Martin and Tina will come to you first, and then Shara will go to you after them. And I'd really like to challenge your candidates to think about why Young Green should vote for you when you're giving your closing speeches, because this is your last opportunity to persuade us, other than on Twitter and social media and other places. But you have a room full of Young Greens, so why not take the opportunity now? So Martin and Tina, I'm going to hand over to you for 2 minutes.
I'd obviously encourage Young Greens to attend the various other hustings that are still to come up, and we'll get as many of those in as we can. What we are offering as leaders is working towards unification within the party on a range of issues where there are differences, where different mechanisms have to be used in relation to those, but where that lack of unity is disabling the party in relation to its core function, which is to do with those green issues, climate change, biodiversity. That must be our core issues and recognised as such. We also take one of the phrases from the Holistic Review, which is that of servant leadership, that we aren't leaders who do something to others, we lead with other people. And we want to be out there working with the groups, Young Greens, working groups, member groups, but also with local and regional parties, the ones who are actually out there, walking the streets, electing people. I'm aware as local party development officer for my region that those sometimes run into trouble. And I've had support in the past from a leader who has come out to actually help rebuild a party, in the other case, to help in founding the party. That's part of the leader's role, is to be out there all the time. And then supporting those that are out there on the street, trying to get people elected. We can't lay claim to that. That is something that members do out there on the street. The leaders are not really important in relation to the election of local councillors. It's the work that is done by the people on the street. So that's what we're offering. We're offering leadership that is leadership with, not leadership ahead.
Thank you very much, Martin. Under 2 minutes. I feel like I'm again turning into everyone's teacher and congratulating you all for staying under it. So I'm going to stop and move over to Shara, who's next.
Thank you. I found the questions really quite inspiring, and this is my final opportunity to address you on instructions as Young Greens. But firstly, what do we mean by that? You know, we've all got characteristics which sometimes we think more or less about. But I think that I am a the unity candidate for the party, because it's no good us thinking, for example, here's somebody who isn't like us, we find their speech offensive, but offensive for the right reasons. If we think we're going to carry on putting people in boxes and throwing away the key, that's not going to work for us. That is not going to work for this Green Party. What we need to do is overcome disagreement and dispute and make sure we get better at debating with one another. I mean, there was even closer to home, there was even a motion which I was actually quite astonished to see appear on a Young Greens convention. Only 21 people voted for it, but you know, I addressed it because it became public. I addressed it publicly, but I will do that because not just because I care for my reputation, but I care for my reputation for the right reasons. And let's just return to that voter who commented that how much they were surprised they agreed with me except for. Well, what is that thing that you feel that is preventing you from voting for me? Look at the details and consider that they're not as may have been misrepresented to you. You've seen me today. I'm a true Green, and I will fight for the rights of every last individual on the planet, whether in the South or the North, whether our contemporaries or the younger generation or future generations. That's what gives me resilience. That's what gives me the capacity to want to stand for the Green Party, because I feel I have to, because our prize is great. It's nothing less than universal death. Thank you. Avoidance of universal death.
Thank you, Shara. Again, almost perfectly on time. Ashley, we're going to come to you next. And then just for prior warning, Adrian will be after that, and then Amelia will be last for this one. So Ashley, over to you for 2 minutes.
Okay, so for once it seems that I'm unmuted. That is down to my years, I suppose, not being totally au fait with technology. But that leads on nicely to what I have to say, which is that for better or worse, this is your world now. Unfortunately, our generation has done very little but monitor our civilization's impending doom. Yet I would ask you to encourage the party to follow the path that I suggested earlier on, to forge the progressive alliance that we must get to rid us of the Tories and negotiate for PR, seek ecologically and socially ethical investment, and better target our resources to address the climate emergency from the ground up. You are the future, as I once was. Yet, for some time now, I have realized that I will probably never see the fruits of my labor for the cause. I will eventually be passing my baton on to you to fight the good fight in the hope that you will see a brighter day. However, while I am still around, with accountability, honesty, and compassion, together, let's do this thing.
Thank you, Ashley. I was just about to give you your 30-second warning, but that's completely fine. So we're going to go to Adrian next for your 2 minutes. Over to you, Adrian.
Thank you very much, Jane, and everybody for a really interesting discussion tonight, and really appreciate all the questions that we've heard. Carla and I are centering compassion in our leadership bid, compassion for each other, our communities, and the natural world. And to me, that sums up what green politics is about. It sums up how we need to work with each other to ensure we have an inclusive party where everyone feels welcome and at home and able to be part of the transition that we need to deliver, not only for our party to take it to the next level, but the transition we need to take society on as well. So you've heard from all the candidates about their views on where the party is at and how we move forward. And you've heard lots of good intentions, but good intentions are not enough. We need people with the expertise to deliver. And Carla and I are ready to bring our 33 years of political experience to leadership, our track record of winning elections, representing the general public through 14 years as Green councillors, our history of delivering in the media, and our professional experience. We're the only candidates in this election with experience as elected Greens. And we don't just bring the ability to win elections, because being a local councillor means having to talk with people from all sections of society, not just those you agree with. It's easy in the Green movement to fall into the trap of talking mostly to other like-minded people and forget there's lots out there who see the world differently. In order to get our ideas implemented, we need to bring people with us. We need to take this opportunity of the Greens high in the polls to bring wide public support. We need to show our comprehensive offer of policies across the board, and everything from a fair economy to public health and education, and our policies on a fair and inclusive transition as well. So all the other parties are failing on the issues that matter. We've got the opportunity to take the Green Party to the next level, and we need the leadership that will be able to deliver that. Please vote for Carla and I as your first preference.
Thank you, Adrian. Again, almost perfectly on time. I don't know why I keep continuing commenting on the time though, but I'm going to hand over to Amelia now for the last of our closing speeches. So Amelia, over to you, 2 minutes, off you go.
Thank you. So you know me as your deputy leader for the last 7 years. You know me because I was a young Green when I was first elected. You know me as a graduate of 30 under 30, a person that's been there on demonstrations to ensure that we are challenging tuition fees, we are challenging points that are oppressing young people throughout history. I've been there with you speaking at events. I have been there at your side. You've seen Tamsin, maybe not as much, but they have been there as well, making sure that they've been in the press and media standing up for young people when there have been education protests and speaking out at many issues of our time. I get frustrated when people say that young people are our future. Young people are our now and our present. And it's young people in our party that are making an incredible difference, whether that's as elected councillors, whether that's as co-chairs for the Young Greens, whether that's being campaign managers, or whatever part you play that makes this party possible. I applaud your work because we are doing incredible things together. It is important that we are lifting up diverse voices, and I want to continue my work with the Young Greens to do that. We're not just talking about warm words. When Tamsin and I came together, we had a strategy for change because we know that our party and our country are at a crossroads at the moment. We know that to get more Greens elected, we need more people on doorsteps. We know that we need to challenge the press and media and ensure that the Green Party are the voice on the climate emergency. If you want to be involved with our campaign, if you want to be a part of history, then reach out to us on social media, on Twitter, and get involved because we can do something incredible together.
Thank you very much, Amelia. And that ends our hustings almost, other than for me to say a huge thank you to everyone who's come along tonight, all of our Young Greens here, all of our non-Young Greens here as well, because we know that there are some here. Huge thank you to the candidates as well. I know that you've all got a long list of hustings lined up for this week, and I hope you do get some time to rest your voices. I'm sure that you'll need it. And we'd really like to thank you for your support of the Young Greens to date, and your commitments to support us in the future as well. And we look forward to working with all of you. And I'm going to keep you all here for another minute or two because I'm going to do a quick fundraising plug for the Young Greens. So we've had a really bumper year last year, and we've got another one planned this year of political education, of training, campaigns, groups and societies works, and of course our local elections. So last year we managed to double our number of Young Green councillors at the last election. We had 700 young people learning why capitalism is broken and how to overthrow it in our political education lecture series. And we offered skills training, not just to 30 under 30, but to 130 under 30s. No, to 130 under 30, that makes more sense, in our online training sessions. And with restrictions lifted, we're keen to do even more this year, but we can't do it without your help. Our budget comes from small donors, and the rich, unsurprisingly, won't support us. And a small regular monthly donation is really helpful for us. It helps us to plan in advance, and it allows us to be a lot more ambitious, and we do have big ambitions. So please consider supporting us with a gift of £5 a month to keep us going strong. We really appreciate it. It allows us to do everything that we're doing, and so much more as well. So I'm going to post a donation link in the chat. No, Kelsey's already done it because we're that organised. And if you want to get involved with the Young Greens as well, please do get in touch with us. We have groups all across the country, and you can set one up or you can get involved. And we've also, we will be announcing soon that we have some exciting co-option positions open on 3 of our committees in the Young Greens as well, which is really exciting. So finally, thank you all so much for coming, for giving up your evenings, and enjoy the rest of your evenings, and we will see you at another Young Greens event soon. Thank you all so much for coming.
Thank you so much for all